Well, good morning and welcome to Wisconsin 2035. People are joining us right now. I had a little miscue here on my end, so sorry for the delay. Thanks for joining us today. We have with us Wade Goodson, who's or Goodsell, I'm sorry, with WMC CEO and Executive Director of WMC. Known Wade for I don't know a number of years, and he's a good guy. So he'll be here to talk about Wisconsin um, uh, 2035 and the economic blueprint for success that we need over the next 15 years. For those listening in, we will be recording this. So if you want to go back later, we'll be pushing it out to the membership for later viewership. But the way we're going to do this, I'm going to have Wade talk about the plan and the strategies and how they came about arriving at the conclusions and the strategies that were kicked off from that. And then at the end, we'll open it up for questions. So if anybody has a question, you just use that Q&A tab on the bottom of the screen and submit those, and I will review those and ask Wade those questions at the end. So with that, I'll throw it over to Wade, and the show's all yours.
Well, thank you, John, and I'll start sharing my screen. Does that look all right, John?
It's perfect.
Okay, and before I get going, just two comments, maybe similar to many of you. I have a heavy heart this morning, thinking about the people in Ukraine, praying for their safety, praying for our leaders this morning. So I may be, those of you that have had a chance to connect with prior, maybe a bit more muted than I usually am, but a heavy heart with the Ukrainians on my mind this morning. Secondly, it is good to be with all of you. As John said, I've known John and Rob and the team at the Chamber and the EDC for a long time, and think highly of the work of John and the Chamber. He's, not only a leader in Oshkosh, he's a leader within the Chamber world here across the state. So thank you for the partnership, John. Let me start out today. I'm going to go for about 20 minutes overviewing our Wisconsin 2035 report. But to get going, let me just share 7 quotes. This first quote I would categorize as a weakness, maybe a threat as well. Slow population growth is a huge weakness. The K-12 educational system needs to be improved. High school graduates need to be work ready or tech school or university ready. They need the right educational focus. And let me try to advance my slide. Certainly a threat. People or lack thereof need to retain talent. Talent attraction is key. Minimize government regulations and mandates. This was told to me, I believe, in February of 21, 12 months ago, long before we were ever talking about OSHA ETS. Certainly a strength. Wisconsin's #1 asset is our people. Interestingly enough, and I know in Oshkosh, there's plenty of, there's such a strong manufacturing base. This quote, I think, is both a strength and an opportunity, and it was told to me by a non-manufacturer. Advancing our manufacturing advantage makes sense. Make your strength better and continue to improve and advance it. Build on your strengths. Don't dwell on your weaknesses. I think this is also illustrative of a strength. Our manufacturing base is a strength. If you don't make anything, where's your value? And then finally, this certainly was told to me by a Wisconsin manufacturing executive, and as only a manufacturer can say, I don't know if this is a strength or an opportunity. Thank goodness we aren't California. So I wanted to start with those quotes, because during Q1 of 2021, it was death by 1,000 Zooms. Well, actually more like 80 Zooms, but I had the opportunity to speak with industry executives from across the state. Many of you involved in the Oshkosh Chamber, some of you who serve on the board of the Chamber, some of you that I know are going to be on the call today. Talked to different industry leaders, different executives in different geographies throughout the state. But I also talked to governmental leaders and academic leaders and Chamber of Commerce leaders and philanthropic leaders, and even a leading union leader here in the state. And the input that I heard from asking those same 4 questions in the here and now of 2021, what are the strengths and the weaknesses in Wisconsin's economy? And as we look out on the middle of the next decade, what are our opportunities and our threats, i.e. Wisconsin 2035? We compile that data and that feedback. And on December 9th of 2021, we released our Future Wisconsin Projects Wisconsin 2035 report, a vision for Wisconsin's economic future. And we view it as the business community's vision for the state's economy. Because when we talk about collaboration and we talk about thought leadership, we think the business community needs to own the future of the state's economy. Not exclusively, again, a 3-legged stool with government and academia as the other legs of the stool, but we think the business community needs to lead that. Because one of the things, regardless of our political stripes, that I think most of us probably can agree on, our elected officials, whether we work closely with them or we don't work very closely with them at all, whether we like them or don't like them, on their best days, they're probably thinking out to their next reelect, whether it's 2 years or 4 years. And that, I think, creates a huge opportunity for the Wisconsin business community to lead and serve as the thought leaders. Before I dive into the report, let me just share 2 lenses from which I view this report. The status quo is regression and not momentum. Whether it's Forbes, it's CEO magazine, it's Site Selection magazine, it's CNBC, whatever their rankings are, you know, there's all sorts of rankings and kind of beauty pageants on different states. One of the things you'll see is if in Wisconsin, we're not aggressively and actively trying to improve our state's business climate, there's a ton of other states passing us by. And in a world in which there's national and global competition for economic investment and capital investment, we need to be proactive in improving our Wisconsin business climate. So that's very much the professional lens of which I view this report. But on a personal lens, you can see my sweet daughter, Tegan Goodsell. Tegan will be 5 pretty soon. She's in 4K this year. And if you do the quick math, she's going to graduate from high school here in this state in 2035. And whether she goes on to the 2-year, to the 4-year, direct to the workforce or the military, whatever her and my son's economic future looks like, personally, I want to ensure there's an economic future in the state. It's my home. I heard that sentiment from executives throughout the state, whether it's the future of their company, the future of their workforce, or the future of their family. It's very personal when we think about the future of the state. The 3 leading themes that came out of this report, if you've spent time with John and the chamber at all, I don't think any of these 3 themes are going to surprise you. It's workforce, it's tax, and it's K-12 education. Guys like me, we've spent over a decade, and I think many of you probably would agree, there's such a strong correlation between K-12 and our workforce pipeline. However, today I want to try to articulate and litigate the case that there's also a strong correlation between our workforce and our tax landscape. So let's dig in as it relates to workforce. Do you remember back to 2010? You know, we talked about things like the workforce paradox or the skills gap, and we had 7.9% unemployment, and yet our members from across the state said, we can't find enough skilled labor. Well, certainly there still is a skills gap today, but the longer that I've been at the chamber, the more executives I talk to on a weekly basis, increasingly, I believe that there's a people gap or a body gap that's driving the labor challenges much more pronounced than a skills gap. A little bit of data to back that up. If you looked at the Job Center of Wisconsin's website on December 8th, the day before we released this report, we had 130,000 available jobs in Wisconsin and only 50,000 job seekers. Talk about a disconnect. It's a people gap. If you think help is on the way during the pandemic, unfortunately, it's not. As some of you may have heard, our president and CEO, Kurt Bauer here at WMC, Kurt often tells the jokes, I'll share it with you. You know what we need to increase the birth rate in this state? We need more blackouts and more blizzards because it takes 19 years to produce an 18-year-old. Our response is always, Kurt, that may be the case, but we know we don't need more pandemics because in 2020, the total births in the US fell to the lowest rate since 1979, 4% lower than the year prior in 2019. This infographic, are you having trouble hiring employees? This is from our biannual WMC CEO survey. We released this information 2 weeks ago. 88% of Wisconsin CEOs said, yes, we're having trouble hiring. Leads to the question, wouldn't you like to meet that 12% and hear their labor story and why they're not having trouble hiring? So if you look at the demographic trends, you look at our labor experience or lack thereof and lack of people here in the state of Wisconsin, and then geeks like me that look at and evaluate the 2020 census data, from 2010 to 2020, the US population grew by 7.4%. However, during that same 10-year time frame, our population in Wisconsin didn't even grow by half of that, only growing by 3.6%. And if you zoom in a little bit deeper, in our 72 counties here in the state, 21 counties lost population. That's not working age population, that's total population. 21 counties of our 72 lost population over that 10-year lens. Certainly concerning. So again, from our biannual CEO survey from 2 weeks ago, do you support or oppose a taxpayer-funded talent attraction campaign aimed at drawing more people into Wisconsin and filling available jobs? Only 12% of Wisconsin CEOs are opposed to that, with 78% in support. I know the Chamber's been very involved in economic development, and those of you that have been involved may be aware that under Governor Walker's leadership, Mark Hogan, Tricia Brown at WEDC at the time, Wisconsin was one of the first states in the nation to run a statewide talent attraction campaign. And really, there were 3 planks on that campaign. 1, veterans, 2, UW system alum, and 3, millennials and other Midwestern cities. So Wisconsin, as some of you may be aware, we're one of the best states in the country for veterans benefits. As service members transition out of the military and into the civilian workforce, the Department of Defense will pay for their last moves. The state of Wisconsin, it was an interagency collaboration between WEDC, DWD, Department of Veterans Affairs, working closely with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundations, hiring our HEROES program. It was so well received that the International Economic Development Corporation gave us national accolades and recognition for this innovative approach to bringing veteran talent into the state of Wisconsin. And what happens? As only government can do, we ended the program. We were so disappointed to see the Evers administration and the current leadership at WEDC walk away from talent attraction, not just veterans attraction, but trying to bring those with UW system roots, technical colleges, private colleges, and university roots back to the state, or millennials that have already opted into a Midwestern lifestyle, whether it's lifestyle or family, trying to poach them into the state. WEDC totally backed away from that. We've been disappointed with that. That's why we were advocates in the last state budget. The legislature allocated $3 million for WEDC to, again, restart these talent attraction efforts, because the war for talent, we see it globally, we certainly see it nationally and interstate, and we need to be aggressive here in Wisconsin. So if we can get WEDC to restart these initiatives, if we can in future state budgets, maybe in future administrations in the state, to make this a point of focus or priority, what do we sell? Well, as you look at Van Line's annual study, 4 in 10 job seekers, or 4 in 10 people, move for economic opportunity. That trails only those that move for family or love, and certainly it's hard to control both of those dynamics. Do you remember that slide on 80,000 available, 130,000 available jobs in the state? Only 50,000 people to meet those jobs? There certainly is economic opportunity in this state. When you look at our cost of living, whether it's the West Coast, the national average, or the East Coast, We are significantly lower, 19% lower than the West Coast, 8.1% lower than the national average, and 23% lower than the East Coast. Your money goes further here in Wisconsin. And then when you look at our 11 largest metropolitan or micropolitan areas in the state, there's a cost of living well below the national average. You can see in Oshkosh alone, it's 6.4% below the national average. Gives you an advantage to retain and recruit families and employees into this community. One of the things, I'll just answer this before I'm asked about it, talking about metrics like fiscal stability, yes, that's geeky, yes, I know. But when you compare that to our neighbors from the South in Illinois, who have a $160 billion unfunded pension liability, that unfunded pension liability today is tomorrow's tax increase. And the fact that in Wisconsin, we're projected to have a budget surplus, as well as a robust rainy day fund due to prudent budgeting and a fully funded pension system due to decades upon decades of political leaders with the foresight to budget responsibly, we have that sound fiscal foundation in the state. Speaking of workforce, the national average for labor force participation rate is 61%. The good news is in Wisconsin, our labor force participation rate, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in September of last year, was 66.6%. Minnesota was tops in the nation. We're number 6 in the nation on labor force participation rate, beating the national average by 5%. But if you go back and look in the mirror nearly 30 years, 25 years, and you go back to October of 1997, we hit a high water mark in this state with a 74.5% labor force participation rate. I'm not convinced we can get back there, but for every 1% we can move on that labor force participation rate, that's 45,000 people off the sidelines back into the workforce. And when we talk about labor force participation rate, we're talking about able-bodied adults ages 16 to 64. So I think an opportunity to reintegrate people back into the workforce, certainly there's an opportunity then for some upskilling and reskilling. So now drawing the bridge between workforce and tax. Our tax climate here in Wisconsin, as many of you probably feel, still is not a strength. And in fact, I would articulate it's a pretty significant weakness. We're the 6th least tax-friendly state for the middle class, and you don't have to be a CPA to understand when you're talking about tax and you're on a list next to New Jersey and New York, that is exactly where you don't want to be. We're the 8th highest in the US for property tax, and then we're the 11th highest for state and local income tax. Thankfully, nowhere is certainly not neighborhoods we want to be on any of those 3 lists. And then I'll briefly go back again to the 2020 census data, because when you look at where people are migrating and flocking to, or where they're fleeing from, the census data shows 4 people leave and go to a low tax state for every 1 person that goes out. So 4 into a low tax state for every 1 person that goes out. 4 in, 1 out. When you think about a high tax state, it's the exact opposite. 2.5 people leave for every 1 person that goes in. So yes, we've seen economic growth and population growth, and typically you need population growth to drive GDP growth and economic growth. And so we've seen, and many of us know this anecdotally, whether it's Tennessee, Texas, Florida, yes, they're climates with more sunshine and warmer weather. There are also states that have made strategic decisions not to have a personal income tax. And that's why we've seen population growth even in states like South Dakota. So when you look at the 8 states across the country without a personal income tax, 2 more are on the runway to do so, and many more are discussing it. I think it leads the question in Wisconsin, is it time for a bold reform that can address our workforce problem and also our taxation problem? Is there an opportunity for meaningful and bold personal income tax reform with an idea such as repealing the personal income tax. The week after we released this report, UW-Madison economist Noah Williams released a report. And in that report, he's very broad brushstrokes, Noah laid out, you could repeal the personal income tax and raise the sales tax to 8%. For the median household, it would be a $2,700 reduction in income tax, an $1,100 increase in the sales tax, and it would still be a net savings of $1,600 per median household in the state that would drive economic growth. Do you think that tax savings would enhance your ability to recruit nationally, to recruit from Illinois, from Minnesota? Do you think it would, as your employees have more money in their paychecks, do you think it would help to retain those employees? It would help the families in your communities? Do you think it would help fuel growth in your community that would lead to more enrollment in your schools or educational institutions? When you look at the 2020 census data and you overlay personal income tax or lack thereof with economic growth, with migration trends, the data is pretty clear. I think it's time for a serious conversation in Wisconsin about repealing the personal income tax, especially knowing that we're projected going into the next 2-year biennium for the state budget to have over a $2 billion budget surplus, in addition to nearly $1 billion in our state's rainy day fund. I think a pretty good time to start talking about meaningful tax reform and giving us an opportunity to control our own destiny as it relates to workforce. Finally, and I won't spend a ton of time on this because there's such a strong correlation between workforce and K-12 education. Again, if you're familiar with the state budget, that biannual document has typically, or the document that works on a biennium, a 2-year state budget, is typically about an $80 billion document. Well, in the past state budget, $14.2 billion of that was allocated for K-12 funding from GPR, general purpose revenue, in the state budget. As we've seen GPR grow by over $4 billion over the last decade, we've seen proficiency scores decrease. And whether that's 3rd or 8th grade, proficiency scores are 10 points off where they were a decade ago, and certainly have only been harmed through the COVID pandemic. At the Chamber and State Chamber Foundation, we're not anti-education funding. We believe that education funding needs to be very targeted and very tailored, whether that's into career counselors, because we know our guidance counselors, especially coming out of the pandemic, are overworked with social and emotional issues amongst our youth. But if schools can invest into career counselors to help students understand whether it's the 2-year, the 4-year, the workforce, or the military, they're all great opportunities. It's different for each student and each family. Our Business World program that we lead in the foundation, we'll work with about 5,000 middle school and high school kids throughout the state. And we want to inspire them that regardless of where you are, it doesn't dictate where you're going. And in all 72 counties in the state, there is economic opportunity for you. We think career counselors in the state could help drive that message. Additionally, let's invest into dual enrollment programs that will help with tech ed and STEM education. The final infographic from that CEO survey of 2 weeks ago, 91% of Wisconsin CEOs support increased K-12 funding specifically aimed at STEM, industrial, arts, and tech ed programming. I would call that a mandate, because what the Wisconsin CEOs understand, or what many of you understand, when you look at STEM versus non-STEM wages across the country, and this is Bureau of Labor Statistics federal data, STEM occupations make almost $90,000 a year, more than doubling non-STEM occupations. When you zoom into Wisconsin, the average pay for the skilled trades, whether it's manufacturing, electrician, or plumber, that's quite competitive. And so let me briefly reiterate the 5 recommendations. You've heard me touch on all 5, but I'll briefly go through them. When you look at the 24 pages and what we think the future of the state's economy looks like in 2035, One, we need to reinstitute a national talent attraction campaign. Two, we need to take a serious look at repealing the personal income tax to help with our ability to become a growth state in terms of population and economic growth. Three, you heard my passion for education and educating youth on career opportunities. Four, and connected with that, we need to expand tech ed and dual enrollment programs. And five, as I conducted these 80 interviews and the executives were assured that these were off the record, I heard a lot of frustration, what could be generalized as woke culture, that schools and our educational leaders need to reestablish a focus on core subjects, reading, writing, and STEM programming, and away from maybe other cultural issues or issues best left to the family. So those are our 5 recommendations. I started with 7 quotes. Let me close with one that I thought was illustrative. If we can't figure out the labor, 2035 never comes for us. This report, the macroeconomic issue, the driving economic issue for this state between now and the next decade and a half is workforce. We're going to need partners. We're going to need private sector leaders, academic leaders, governmental leaders aligned in recognizing that issue. So, John, thank you for the opportunity to share our foundation and the Wisconsin business community's vision for the state. I would love to hear from you, love to hear from attendees. Maybe what do I have right? What do I have wrong? And what am I missing? In our steering committee calls, you serve on the thought leadership arm for this. Those are the 3 questions that I often ask. And typically, gang, I hear a lot more of what I'm missing and have wrong. So I would love to hear your feedback.
If there's questions from anybody, you can just bring them in through the Q&A tab. I think what I might do, I'm going to ask a question, Wade, and then I might just open it up for anybody in attendance if they want to ask, just verbally ask a question. We can do that. So let me ask that question, then I'll do that part. But an intriguing part of the presentation, I heard it back in December, and the plan was this whole issue of reforming the tax climate. Our rankings are, Wisconsin's been called tax hell in many circles, and I think there's an understanding of that. But back early part of February, we had our featured economist at our economic outlook breakfast, and he was asking, what do we do to attract more people to the state? And his response was repeal your personal property or personal income tax. He says, look at what's going on in Florida and Texas and in some of these other states. So with that kind of as a backdrop, how is WMC? What are they doing? What are they doing to move this forward? I mean, it certainly takes legislative action, it takes support from the governor's office. And it's not going to happen overnight, but so what's happening in terms of trying to create some traction off of that?
Yeah, good question, John. And we certainly agree with that economist view of the world. And I think, as I mentioned, when you study the 2020 census data, that makes a lot of sense. At WMC, as you may have seen, Senator Roth, your neighbor to the north, recently released legislation last week working to repeal the personal income tax. We certainly agree with the concept of repeal. However, we think the best time for that conversation is at the start of a new legislative session next year, as a new state budget is put together and debated. But ultimately, John, and you get this much better than most, WMC, we exist to be the voice of the Wisconsin business community. Not the right, not the left, the voice of our member businesses. And if we want to get the policies right, we need to get the people right. And that's why for us, you may have seen publicly last month, we endorsed Rebecca Clayfish for governor. We think she's the right leader. Haven't had a chance to personally work with her when I was at WEDC and work on economic development projects, business attraction. She understands business climate. She understands the need for economic competitiveness. So we can have the best policy ideas, but without the right leadership that understands and has an open mind to those policy ideas, they stay ideas in white papers, not legislative action. So much of our work in 2022 is focused on getting the right leaders in the state for 2023. John, I believe you're on mute.
How's that? Thanks. A question came in from a workforce system. We often see companies reluctant to employ people without the required skills. How do we encourage companies to stop thinking about barriers and see all people who are disengaged in the workforce as opportunity?
Great question. I think the current economic landscape really is really going to foster that. I just see we're a trade association of 30 employees. For years, we would put on applications college degree required. Then we changed it to college degree preferred, and now we're just silent on it because we want the best people with the best background and the best work ethic. And so for us, I think companies in this current labor dynamic with record low unemployment, I think there's a need for ingenuity and innovation. Next week, we're having one of our board members speak at our annual workforce conference. Her name's Liz Filter. She runs an organization, VARC, that employs hundreds of adults with different levels of developmental or physical disabilities across the state. And how can you maybe utilize a non-traditional workforce in order to still drive economic productivity? I think VARC's a great example of that.
I don't know if you've been following this, Wade, but Oshkosh Corp about a little less than a year and a half ago, was successful in getting a U.S. Postal Service contract, multi-billion-dollar contract to replace current postal vehicles. All that work, engineering, those sorts of things that happen in Oshkosh, but when it comes to from a production perspective, we just did not have the people to give them a layer of confidence or a level of confidence that they could, manufacture those products here. And, they made a decision to, move it closer to some of their suppliers, some of their end user markets, and, ended up, I believe, in Spartanburg, South Carolina, which, great for Spartanburg. But we certainly understand that decision and that sort of thing. But at 1.6% unemployment, we're getting some pushback from our city council. Just passed a resolution, kind of leveling their level of concern with that. The local UAW is having a demonstration on Saturday to encourage, that business to come back here. That horse is far out of the barn, is not gonna occur. But 1.6%, and that's just not Oshkosh. That's the Fox River Valley. That's a lot of communities in this state. We're not going to be on a lot of lists of any companies who are looking to start a new operation, expand, unless there's some sort of supply connection to a manufacturer, that sort of thing. So with that kind of as a backdrop, where from a recruitment perspective, where can we get people? Where's the most fertile grounds, and what should we be doing more on that?
Yeah, good question. And I think you share this point of view, John. This is my assumption. Who else can lead but the chamber to be the voice of the business community? When the city council is more concerned with politics, than trying to make sure it's a conducive environment for a leading national, but certainly statewide and regional employer like Oshkosh Corporation that has a great employment base, incredible supply chain base, and a great philanthropic base in the state, and you're poking them with a stick over a city council resolution, one, that's very harmful. Companies don't make economic investment decisions in a vacuum. That may have longer term repercussions, and that's unfortunate, for other companies that may be looking to grow or expand in Oshkosh. But when it comes to whether it's the chamber, whether it's through 41 corridor initiative, whether it comes from a regional economic development group. I think there's an opportunity. I know Steve Yonke, if you know Steve, John, he was written up on Insights magazine. Steve used to do veterans attraction for WEDC. When WEDC decided this is no longer a priority, Steve said, I'll create a private sector solution. I'll recruit veterans through Mission Wisconsin. Certainly the great defense backbone in your community, that's probably conducive to recruiting veterans with such a strong world-class brand and manufacturing base there. But really, I view it as there's no substitute for state leadership on this. We can do fragmented approaches, but until there's a broad statewide strategy in place and the state can lead financially in that investment and relaunching that campaign, I would encourage you to keep leaning on your elected officials, leaning on the folks at WEDC. The money's been allocated. I think they just need to restart the campaign. So that's a few different comments.
Immigration always seems to, kind of rear its head, and whenever the immigration discussion comes up, it always gets mushed into the southern border, and that just kind of complicates it, and from the politics of that complicates it even more. But what can we be doing from an immigration perspective? I mean, the U.S. Chamber is there. I mean, certainly you guys are engaged in that, but we don't seem to be loosening anything up very quickly in Washington.
That's well stated, and that really drives. If there's ever a Chamber of Commerce issue, we need more people in this country. And we have the opportunity. I'll zoom out for a minute and pontificate, because we really have an opportunity for an American manufacturing moment. If we can get our tax policy right, if we can get our energy policy right, and we can get our immigration policies right, we can be the most competitive country on earth to manufacture in, because people from across the globe still want to live and work here. And we can be an exporter of natural gas if we get our energy policy right. So we can have the people, we can be affordable on the energy, and we can be affordable on the business climate. We need the right elected officials to get the right policies. And unfortunately, again, I would say regardless of political stripes, we've seen such dysfunction in Washington, D.C., that I don't think we can sit back any longer and try to wait for a comprehensive immigration bill. And whether it's low skill, mid skill, high skill, we need all skill levels in this country. We need more people coming to the U.S. We need them here legally. And that's why I'm such a strong proponent on we can control what we can control and we can't control what we can't control. So I think it's time in Wisconsin to try to take a bold approach in a creative tax policy that would bring people into the state and help retain them. Just because I'm so disillusioned with the immigration conversation out in DC.
We had a comment coming from our superintendent of schools, Brian Davis, and Brian, I'm going to, I think you bring up a good point here, and I'm not necessarily want to read it off, but if you want to unmute yourself and maybe introduce that topic a little bit more, and maybe you can open that up for discussion if you feel so inclined.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, John. I appreciate it. Thanks, White, for the presentation. Super insightful, and happy to be at Madison for the initial kind of presentation. So it's great for us to be, from a K-12 public school aspect, to be connected. Certainly, we know we're important players of this, and I think being on the same page is really important. One of the things that I just want to make sure just put out there that I think is important to track when we're talking about the investment in K-12 education is articulating specifically how much of that investment in K-12 is going to K-12 public education. Specifically, there's currently legislation, to dramatically expand, K-12 education investment in like voucher schools, charter schools, and private schools. And I think it's important to articulate, not that all schools, can't provide some good service, but I think it's important to articulate that as we're looking, if we're using the measures of the forward exam, for example, for reading and math proficiency and kind of back to the basics, those are public school measures. Specifically, charters, vouchers, other, privates don't take that that exam. So I think if we're going to use those measures, and I agree, I think those are measures to be used. There are publicly outward facing measures. If we're going to use those measures, then I think we need to make sure that we're articulating the dollars are going specifically to impact those measures, which are to our public schools and not money, beyond our public schools. So what we've seen is somewhat of a trend, which is, we're certainly keeping our eye on it, is, tax money to go beyond our public schools. And yet, public schools not receiving that money, but continue to be hammered on for proficiency scores, which we certainly know need to be improved. But I just want to make sure, if that makes sense, that as we're talking about the investment, we're aligning that with the scorecard, if you will.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. That's a very fair point on the proficiency scores. At WMC, we've long been supporters of school choice and of the voucher program. We share the worldview, and as a family that this year moved our kids to parochial schools, we share the worldview that parents are the best deciders of their kids' educational futures. But very, very fair point as it relates to measuring educational outcomes, to have the full story. So point well taken.
Thanks. John, I have one other just quick question.
Sure.
Do you mind? So Wade, I just want to articulate this, and I think I have this right, but as you would be looking at kind of measures of success coming out of our public schools, what I see just from your presentation is reading proficiency based on the forward exam, math proficiency based on the forward exam, and then our students that experience either dual enrollment, post-secondary dual enrollment experiences, or like youth apprenticeship experiences. Is it fair to say that those are kind of the three measures that, as we would again walk with our local chamber and the state chamber, those would be three indicators that we could kind of get agreement on to be able to measure? Because those pieces are really important for us to have alignment on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your open mind on that, Brian. I think it's those three, but additionally, and I realize this probably makes your job that much more difficult, and this may be different than the metrics at DPI. It's the feedback you hear from the local business community. And then I think it's also the feedback, or even the how many students go on to need remedial courses, whether it's at the tech school or the 4-year or whatever avenue they choose. We hear, John, I won't speak for your members, I'll speak for what I hear from our members. We hear that students entering the workforce often aren't work or career ready. And the K-12 education system, that's only part of that. Let's not lose sight and outsource parental involvement and the need for organizations and parents to support students in learning life and career skills. I fear that was something, again, is these were off the record conversations and 80 different conversations with, folks, all sorts of diverse opinions. That was a theme I heard once as off the record. We're asking the schools to do too much, and we're asking them to teach on things that the family should be talking about. And so I think it's a wake-up call for us as parents. Again, you saw a picture of my almost 5-year-old. I have a first grade son. And I think about last year, my son in Sun Prairie Public Schools, his first 2 months of kindergarten were entirely virtual. His teacher was incredible, but not only is she trying to corral kindergartners on Zoom, she's trying to coordinate one-on-ones and coursework with parents. And now she's in the scheduling business. And I was absolutely blown away. But you talk about a strain on educators, and Brian, I'm sure you hear the stress on educators. So I think it's almost, yes, I think it's the three metrics you shared. I think it's the anecdotal feedback you hear from the business community. I think it's some of the metrics you hear from either the 2-year or the 4-year schools. But then I think it's also an opportunity for us to refocus education, and really students can get deeper on STEM curriculum, deeper on reading, deeper on writing, and the burden on other issues is not on the schools.
Great. Thanks, Wade. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and Brian brings up a good point, as is Wade. you know, our school district, public school district does an incredible job. My son and daughter are products of the public school system. Both went through elementary, middle, and high school there, and they had a phenomenal experience. I mean, you know, both my son and daughter, you know, went into my son went to UW Oshkosh and College of Business, and my daughter in Madison through their business school. Both got my son out on time, my daughter early, but you know, they entered those institutions with, you know, 40 credits. And you know, but you know, you need to get you know, parents more involved in their education. You know, I mean, you know, by us kind of understanding that and trying to leverage those opportunities as much as possible. You know, you can have a very, very rich educational experience here, which we just need to get, you know, more of that engagement than we have. So,
John, I can't help but to interject, because you should be a proud dad. A few of you may be aware of this, but John's daughter worked for us at WMC for a year and a half, and Erica's very talented. So when he says, you know, a product of a good family and a good system, the proof's in the pudding, and enjoyed having Erica work for our team for over a year.
he loved it there too. So, Alex Hummel had a question that he posted on chat, and Alex, I'm going to push you to get online here, because I tried to open it up and I lost it, so I don't know what that question is. So
That's okay. Can you hear me all right?
oh yeah.
All right, great. Sorry about that. I posted it in the chat when I probably should have done the Q&A. But Wade, thanks very much for your time today and for that really great synopsis of the findings. My question was, has WMC ever considered championing a collaborative talent attraction campaign that goes beyond messaging, beyond tax policy, and maybe assembles some kind of incentive package or pushes an incentive package more broadly that might address something like housing incentives or something longer lasting for example, someone who graduates from the tech college system or from the university system, to make sure that they stick. We do know, based on our data here at UW Oshkosh, we're doing a pretty good job of retaining those out-of-state residents who do choose to invest in one of those systems, our system, of course. But what more can we do? There are states out in the Northeast, for example, that are really hemorrhaging young people and aging faster even. So the question, I guess, is there something we could do? Could you, WMC, or you know, lead some sort of more collaborative, broad campaign to figure that out?
Yeah, and Alex, if my intuition's right, I think you're touching upon a few things, you know, and that's great to hear about those retention metrics. My guess would be that's due to a large part on the welcoming nature of the Oshkosh community, but also the strong employer relationship, the productivity of the employers in the area, and also the willingness of the university to connect with those employers. So that's phenomenal. And we see that, you know, in statewide data, whether it's internships, it's co-ops, you know, pick your term. But once we can get students plugged into economic opportunities in the state, I'll use a technical term, the stickiness, they're much more sticky to Wisconsin, which is exactly what we need. The talent attraction campaign that WEDC had done, you know, let's say a student comes to UWO, they have a good 3 or 4 years there, and economic opportunity brings them down to Chicago, brings them over to Minneapolis, Detroit. Well, they've already opted into the lifestyle once. I think that's an opportunity to bring those alumni of the system, whether it's public schools, private schools, 2-year, 4-year. I think there's an opportunity to bring them back into the state, but more specifically to your point on incentives. You know, and I'm a huge believer in incentives because we've seen it. We saw it last summer, and those of you familiar with us, WMC, we made a lot of noise over the $300 a week federal unemployment booster. You know, we also saw disincentives work. You know, when you disincentivize work, imagine that. People are going to make a rational economic decision not to work. So when you talk about specific incentives to retain maybe students here or young professionals here, I think it's we have considered that. And I think that the benefit of repealing the personal income tax, it would be that, but it would be on a broader scale. It not only would help individuals, it would help the marketing story of attracting people, it would help with the retention. But oh, by the way, 90% of employers in this state, those who drive the Wisconsin economy, 90% of employers in Wisconsin are structured as pass-through entities, i.e. not C Corps. They're S Corps, they're LLCs, they're sole proprietorships, etc. So I think that point on incentives, I think that's really well taken. And we think the opportunity to repeal the personal income tax would be that just amplified.
Okay, we are nearing the 9 o'clock hour here. If there's any last questions, maybe now's a good time to jump in. And before we sign off here, I want to remind folks we've been starting a local legends podcast. We do with Aaron Armstrong with the Venture Project, and this upcoming Thursday, the 3rd, we have John Bergstrom, Bergstrom Auto, joining us. So it's at noon. It's over at Aaron's Venture Project office. It should be a very fascinating discussion with John. If he's a pretty cool guy, very genuine, and has a great story to share. So if anybody wants to join us, please do that. So seeing there's no more questions, Wade, thank you very much for joining us. And those of you who have joined us, thank you for spending an hour with us. We have recorded this. It'll be out on our website later probably this afternoon, and we'll be pushing it out to other members. So with that, we're signing off. And again, thank you all for joining us. Take care.
Thanks, John.